My name is Tom White. I just turned 80 last year, and I spent most of my life in sales and sales management after graduating in 1957 from St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota, in economics. And after 2 years of college, I started in architecture. After 2 years of college, however, calculus did me in, and I changed to economics, which in my later life now has really put me in touch and given me almost a new career in exposing the spending by our U.S. government, which is kind of misunderstood by most people here. The spending we as a country do on military versus all other domestic needs that are becoming so vitally important. I rotated back from France in 1957 after President de Gaulle of France. I was a conservative at the time, and I was really upset with him because he didn't want the presence of Americans on his soil. And as I now look back on it, I see how he realized the commitment or the strings that were attached to our being on anyone's soil. And so I've become kind of a, de Gaulle looks a lot better to me than he did when I left there in 1957 after he said, I don't want any American soldiers on my soil. And I came back and I had a sales background. My father had a sales background. And I had a couple of real good opportunities, and I spent the next 30 years in sales and 25 of the years in sales management. I left in 1985 I got in enough discussions with my bosses when I felt corporate profits were more important than the welfare of the people that were working, which is something that has really been promulgated here for the last 30 years. But I left over a firing of a very well-known manager that I had by the name of Herb Brooks, who had won the hockey in 1980. He won the Miracle on Ice, and I brought him to Jostens to start a new division, and they terminated him after 90 days because they thought he was too visible. And I quit the next day after 35 years with the company and never looked back and wondered what I'd do with my life. And while I was out traveling the country working, my wife was here getting arrested at Honeywell and all types of protest ideas, and I never had the time for it. Well, she was raising the children. So she started picking on me and saying, Tom, why don't you get involved in just one piece? Will you go with me to one peace and justice protest? Will you? And there were enough things to protest, but I had ignored them for 40 years, I guess. So I finally said, you pick one a month and I'll go. And one a month turned into two a month, and I started looking at the situation when I started really looking at the numbers and how we as a federal government were spending our money. I knew I had to get involved in trying to change the government. I did. I was fortunate in having access to some people at fairly high levels who might listen to me, and I took on the role myself of speaking for those who didn't have the power to speak for themselves. And that's becoming more and more here. So I found that I can get too involved in it. My wife now has done a total circle and said I'm spending too much time with it and not enough with the grandchildren and the children. So there's got to be a happy medium, and at 80 years old I'm still doing it. The main project I've had is for 20 years after I left the company, I was sitting at a WHAM meeting, Women Against Military Madness, and I was the only man. My wife dragged me. That was one of the meetings. And there were 40 women and myself, and they were all saying, in 1994, the Republicans had won the election. The president, I think in 1994, wasn't it? And I was sitting at Wham, and all the women who are so active and are on the streets every day said, God darn it, I know they're lying, but I don't have any one-liners to challenge them with. So I'm sitting there, and being a marketing and sales and marketing executive, I conceived the thought of a card that had all the one-liners they could ever use, that they could challenge anybody who asks them, as I have over 20 years. And every year now I've printed about at least 15,000 of them that have been distributed around the world. And they're on how we spend our money at the expense of everything else. So that's kind of my life. It's full.
They're also on the Minnesota Alliance of Peacemakers website. They're accessible all the time.
Yeah. Now Wham has taken it over. That's who I turned it this month.
So Tom, would you like to refer to a single incident or single inspiration which would change your life and you decided to opt for a career in peace?
There is one that's very dear to my heart that I guess influenced me that I could be effective. I happen to have a gay daughter. Everything comes down to a matter of peace and justice and how people are treated. I have a lesbian daughter, and I saw the oppression, and she came out to me now 40 years ago, about the time that I left my job, 35 years ago. And she came out to me, so my wife and I started fighting for gay rights. And a couple of my real successes were that I testified before the legislature 16 years ago. No, almost 25 years ago, sorry. And the issue to bring equality, to make sexual orientation one of the human rights in the state of Minnesota. And it protected gays and lesbian people from being oppressed, mainly in the marketplace. And so it was, my wife and I were at it every day. We won the day with the legislature here, which was one of the first legislatures in the country to adopt that human rights, that sexual orientation was included in the Human Rights Amendment in the state of Minnesota. I took great pride in that, but I met a lot of people, and I met people that I had managed over the years who wrote me from all around the country when I put it in a Christmas letter 25 years ago, that we always described our family. I have 2 boys and a daughter. And I said, we're not always dealt the cards. I mean, we play the cards we're dealt. And in my case, I don't know that any of you have known that I had a lesbian daughter. And I was very proud when we just won the Human Rights Amendment, including sexual orientation. And I got a letter from at least 20 or 25 people around the U.S. who said, I wish you were my dad, or I wish you were fighting for me, or I wish you were here because we need it so badly. And I found that success, and you always like successes. And so I moved on from there to a number of other causes, be it people on the streets, be it people with unequal rights as far as their jobs were concerned. So it just was a motivation for me. And I guess I mentioned that my wife had really been involved, and she got picked up in the Honeywell protest, put in jail for that. And she really influenced me that you could make a difference if you really got yourself involved. So, and I saw almost at that time, that was 30 years ago, the police state that we were trying to start right here in defiance of our Constitution as it was written and as I understood a democratic country. So,
so you would like to consider this Human Rights Amendment as the biggest achievement which you have made in your life as regards your human rights and peace work?
well, the one I got very involved with, which is the second one, is somewhat the same topic. Last year in the state of Minnesota, we were 30 people who had brought a vote to marriage equality. My wife and I were asked to make a video, and we made a video that went viral, in fact, around the country. And it was called the Freedom to Marry Act. And even though we had our Catholic Church here, in which I was raised, spent $800,000 to defeat it, my wife and I and a few legislators and that put out a video, and we totally surprised the country and maybe the world in winning marriage equality and the Freedom to Marry Act for gays, lesbians, transgender people in the United States. So that was even a bigger thing, but it was all part of the same involvement. And as I say, I'm very proud of the fact that there were a lot of people on both sides, conservatives and liberals, that I was in a position through my job and the success of the jobs I had in corporate world, that I used and found that I could change their minds. And that was even a bigger accomplishment because that went countrywide.
So, taking on from this question and your answer, we have seen that you prevailed upon the local parliament here and got some amendments, and then the Equal Rights in Marriage Act. You have been a business marketing professional yourself. So what do you think, what were the ways and methods which worked for you and others can use them as well?
I guess my ability to connect with churches and people to get an audience, to at least allow them, whether I change them or not, to allow them to hear the other side. And I think I've probably done a better job of neutralizing people than I have of a number of successes. But I do, my ability to connect with audiences in churches and schools. And I've particularly seen an opportunity with the young to listen to equality, and much more than we as older people who have been bombarded with a press that has bought the means to influence the public, particularly the misinformed or uninformed public. So I'm connected with a lot of people, and mainly connected with people like Dick Bernard and the Peace people, who will allow me opportunities to speak to groups. And I do feel that that's something I did a lot of in corporate life that I've carried over very successfully. And I've got a passion for it. As you can see, my wife and I are, we're now Catholics in exile, which I'll get into, going to a Quaker meeting, which is quiet and pacifist. And my wife never thought I'd stand 5 minutes in a quiet church. But I absolutely love it because of the refreshment it gives me to sit quietly for an hour and listen to somebody else and not being preached to. So I guess I've got a passion to communicate, and particularly when it's on for the benefit of those who haven't had all the breaks that I've had, whether that be athletics or finance or whatever. So
you just mentioned that you were able to speak to people in churches. So how did those churches agree to provide their platform to you? Is it easy for others? Others can also approach churches and then seek their platform?
I caught them early, and now when they know what I'm speaking about, there are only a few that will allow me to speak. Because as one pastor said to me, one I knew very well, and I know a lot of the priests, but the pastor said, one of the reasons we're not Catholic is, he said, I'll lose half the money that I'm collecting if I allow you to speak anti-government or anti-peace. I'll lose half the money that I'm collecting. And I said, isn't that just what you're in? Why you are a priest or a preacher? I said, that's just what Jesus asked us to do, or Muhammad, or whatever. That's what we as spiritual people should do, and you're dodging it, which is which happens to be what I feel to be, and it was a good question, because it happens to be my biggest failure, is not being able to influence my own church, particularly, and churches in general. There's a spiritual master who happens to be a Trappist monk by the name of Thomas Merton, who's well written and a philosopher and everything, but he says, this gets into the next question, as I thought, and I feel it so strongly, and I try to push churches, and I embarrass a lot of priests. I'm meeting with one in an hour, who's 84 years old, who I asked to be on the panel with me at the state legislature and wear his collar and be as prominent as he could, and he was one of the few that would do it. And we've been lifelong friends. He stood up against them and stood up against the powers and didn't care what anybody thought of him, being on the wrong side as far as they felt, but the right side as far as I felt. But Thomas Merton says, one of the great problems of religion in our time, all religions, is posed by the almost total lack of protest on the part of religious people and clergy in the face of enormous evils. It is not that these people are wicked and perverse, but simply that they are no longer fully capable of seeing and evaluating evils as they truly are, crimes against God, as betrayals of the Christian or religious ethic of love. And it's so true to me. I say, if the churches, if 1 out of 10 would stand. I have a mother that died at 99 years old. And whether it's on gays and lesbians, or it's on oppression in the inner city, or it's on war, if the priest or the pastor didn't tell her, it wasn't right. My biggest failure is affecting the equality for women and gays with the Catholic hierarchy, particularly, because there are a lot of great Catholic people who are on the street every day. But if we could get it to the pulpits, we could make vast changes, and we're doing more and more of that. That's why I won't give up.
One thing has stuck in my mind. You said that the priest said that you have made him lose half of what he was getting before.
His income.
So throw some light on that. Why would someone withhold money on hearing peace messages from the pulpit? We want to understand this phenomena. How did he lose money? Why were people not giving him as much money as they were giving before hearing you?
Oh, I guess the answer would be best displayed in the letters to the editor of the Star Tribune every day, where their Star Tribune was just bought by the owner of the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Minnesota Lynx basketball team, because he said they were too liberal when everyone else looks at them as very conservative. And the main problem is that people don't want to hear. People want to build wealth. And even the most spiritual people, thinking they're spiritual, that God guides them and is good to them if they've got a massive cache of cash. But instead, they don't want their church. The conservatives are running the churches, more or less, just as they're running the newspaper and running everything else. And so, getting more directly to your question, there are very few churches that will allow someone to speak out against because of the influence of the media, that it's the opposite of what they're hearing. So it's cost a lot of churches money for being too liberal.
So do you see any nexus between the powers that be and church as well? We know that they own big corporations. We know that they own media. We know that they contribute to political parties. And so in the same way, do they exercise influence on churches as well? The big interests?
No doubt about it. They influence it just as much as corporations. And churches, for the most part, particularly run by the hierarchy of most churches, are a plutocracy. They're no different than the CEOs and the people running, with the exception of a few church communities, as they call the Mennonites and the Quakers, are peace churches. There aren't many peace churches. People go to look good on Sunday and to meet their neighbor, but in between Sunday to the next Sunday, there's no involvement at all in the social issues. And nobody's preaching them to go to the social issues because they're all too comfortable with themselves. And we're called to rock the boat. And we're not rocking the boat, or the world would be much different.
So again, I would like a more direct question. Do you think the big interests which are controlling corporations, they're controlling the media, they're controlling the political parties, are making sure to control or influence churches as well?
No doubt about it. The people that speak up at the churches are the ones that put the most money in. And those are the people that the pastors, the priests, the rabbis are afraid of. They don't want to. I have so many instances where I know the richest people in the community dictate that people like me or Vets for Peace don't talk at churches. I think it's money influences, money is much too influential.
Even at the pulpit as well?
Even in the pulpit.
Okay.
There are very few, and that's why the real good ones, like Romero,
so what do you see
stand out.
the actual potential of the churches in ensuring to create more awareness about peace amongst U.S. citizenry, which they are not using?
I would say, and Vets for Peace would be a good organization to get involved with, and I belong to a group called Minnesota Alliance of Peacemakers. So does Dick. We all do, and if every one of us, we have 75 groups in this coalition. If every one of them, my cry has been, if every one of them would insist of their pastor or priest or rabbi to have someone speak from the pulpit, they would get it done, and they would be speaking to 1,000 people at a time. But nobody does it. One of the problems with the peace community, you asked as one of the questions, is that we haven't formed the coalition to really affect change, whether it be down at the location of the newspaper, the location of the radio station. We all, in our little ways, are down on a protest 100 of us here, or down at 50th in France, 50 here. But if we had 2,000 that would join the bridge, there are enough little ones, but we've all got our own little favorite charities or options without all of us coming together and really getting coalesced about and putting on a demonstration that they can't ignore.
Tom, this was one of the topics which we were coming to. We see so many groups and individuals working on the theme of peace. Even you have yourself mentioned that 75 groups and individuals constitute a map. But we do not see collaboration amongst those small groups
Right.
and individuals. So what stops people from collaborating with others for the same objective? Because the government and big interests are happy that way, that so many people are working individually and not getting collected.
I know it's a hard number. I know we've got real effective people, particularly in Minnesota more than anywhere, where we've got different groups and organizations. I know like Citizens United, like Move to Amend, where we do have people that are motivating 100 people to get together, 200 people to get together. I don't know, we even put on our national convention, I think the most we've had is 350 people. I think the problem is all of us, like me, and are tired. We've had a hard time getting the youth to rally. And there are youth waiting on the college campuses to erupt, I think, and to be led some way by us. And it's a phenomena that we haven't been more effective. Letters to the editor, I've written a ton of letters to the editor, and right now I have to be pacified by the person who said, now dead, just feel if they don't print it, you've affected the one person who has read it. And I read the paper this morning in the Minneapolis Star, and I want to write them a note when I write all the time about the disparity of wealth or inequality in the U.S. They haven't, I think, if I tracked for a year, they have not had one anti-government commentary. Not one anti-government. It's anti, and certainly with Glenn Taylor now going in there to buy it, a billionaire who says he's going to balance it, he's going to make it conservative, and we're sure not to have any. But I wrote a criticism on the amount of money that we're spending in Afghanistan, $10 million a minute. $10 million a minute, and they didn't print it. I mean, and it was the best, most succinct commentation that I think I've made. It's crazy that you can't get through the media.
Tom, again, I'm taking you back to my question. What stops organizations from collaborating with each other? Is those collaborations having some hidden agenda which they don't want to share with someone else, or they do not want to share their space with others, or there is ego problems? What's there?
And I can't blame any one of them. Any one of them are dedicated. But I think of a wonderful guy, Cecil Ramarain, who's written a whole text for the schools, the middle schools of the U.S. And he's tried to go to schools and get them in to at least have a peace curriculum. And no one, even the places he's investigated, that he's approached and presented it to, have not picked up on it. And I think it's an idea that if all of us, but I say we meet once a month, or every 2 months now, and the people just don't have a chance without the press or the media at least presenting the case. I think that there is a definite major plan by the media to undermine a lot of the groups who don't feel they're worthy enough to be coalesced worthy enough to have a say in what goes on in the politics, I said, this may cover my rambling the last month or two. I always am so proud, I've used as an example, most of the people that would be glad to join the kind of group that we've got, even the Minnesota Alliance of Peacemakers, which now we used to meet 75 people, we now meet 35. And we used to have representatives from all 75 groups. But I think they've all kind of given up on the ability to make any kind of change. And I think it's been a result of the media. It's been a result of a concerted effort on the part of corporations to undermine a democratic society. Thomas Jefferson said a long time ago, and it's on the door of the University of Virginia. My quick answer to you, not my quick, my long, is the dumbing down of America. The dumbing down of America. If people were informed of the discrepancy and disparity, not only in the way we spend our money, but in the influence that the people watching television, the television stations who preach all day, and even in their sitcoms, are selling conservatism and selling the fact that anybody can make it if they try. Thomas Jefferson said, if we are to guard against ignorance and remain free, it is the responsibility of every American to be informed. And above the door of the University of Virginia, it says, an informed citizenry is vital for a democracy to persist. We're so far from a democracy right now. We're run by the corporations. It's called a plutocracy. And the main reason, and the reason I had trouble putting a handle on it, is it's the dumbing down of America has come from so many sources. The TV, the television, what's on? Why is Rachel Maddow and why is MSNBC on a minor station that's really watched 3 hours or 4 hours a day, if the TV owner even gets it, without it being on a premium package? But they get the news that the financiers and the billionaires want us to get and want them to get. And even people who had been the most involved peacemakers are wavering about whether they think, in light of what's being argued against them, they even have anything to say about equality. I had an argument with one that was the best peacemaker I knew, and he said, war is good for us. I said, where did you read that? War is good. Well, it makes our economy run. We need all the manufacturers to make all the profit we do. We need to have, we need to be in 130 countries of the world to provide a market for our corporations. Not knowing, and the lack of information is, not knowing that our presence in the world is supported by 50% of our federal discretionary budget. 50%. Well, 6% goes to education, and we wonder why we're 49th in the world in literacy? No doubt in my mind, being informed and going out of my way to be informed, that it's so intentional and has been for so long. Education has no merit anymore. We don't want them to be educated. We want them to hear the one-liners that come off about the welfare cheats and the immigrants taking our jobs. It's crazy, and people can't see it. It's even hurting themselves. It's hurt the middle class. It's hurting Americans here forever. The same machine, the imperialistic machine that is trying to dominate the world. It's
So do you have any suggestion in this regard, which would, how can we make these organizations work more collaboratively with each other?
the politicians.
These organizations and individuals who are working on peace, how can we work them together? And have a greater impact.
I wish it's almost an enigma that we can't come together. MAP was big when Dick was running it. We're now so fragmented, and it's almost as if there was an intent not to be involved in someone else's, not to have 4 or 5 major objectives. And we don't meet often enough to put together what is the major objective. Is it all to come together 4 times a year down on Hennepin Avenue and stop traffic? Everyone says, well, I've got my own deal and I've got my own deal, and I just presented a program where if we solicited essays from all the students, 10 students here in Minneapolis, to submit an essay on what they feel their involvement in peace and justice has been. And we gave them a platform and gave them once a year the opportunity to read that, while the athlete is over here being extolled on why they are getting an award, and had a peace and justice essay contest in 10 schools in a city and give it a $1,000 scholarship, which we have the basis for. But in presenting that for myself to our group, I was told, well, I've got my own World Citizen, I've got my own over here, and we do give that, and once a year we give out a $200 scholarship. But nobody, all of us haven't gotten together to have one venue. The dumbing down of America. There used to be, up to 25 years ago, at the convention center in Minneapolis, was what they called a faith gathering. 15,000 people would fill the auditorium. On spirituality, on equality, on peace and justice. It folded. People don't even remember it. But it made money for everybody else, but it was undermined maybe that it stopped traffic downtown at 4 o'clock so that people didn't spend their last dollars on clothes, whatever. I apologize that I haven't been more succinct on what I've presented to you, but that is the question. Your question was perfect. Why, with all the effort by so many good people, have we not, in fact, it's gone the other way?
Okay, I'm coming towards my last question, because many of the questions have been answered in between your other replies. Any message which you would like to give to people in general, youth in particular, peace message, what they should be doing to take care of others which are dying in other parts of the world because of the US wars?
Well, I think we need a lot more protest. Like I say, letters to the editor are almost being turned down now in the major newspapers that are critical of our imperialism. There have been some great movies out that answer the question. One is Robert Wright, the former, who should have been the Secretary of Labor, put out a movie on, the name of it, I think, was Inequality for All. it should be shown everywhere. He teaches at Berkeley. And there are three or four movies that we somehow have to get a better marketing outreach by the peace community here in order to get movies like that shown and then discussed in discourse. The right movies that show and are told far more eloquently than I can tell it, why it's necessary, why how programmed is not only the dumbing down of America, but the fact that we form inequality where everyone got together and fought for a common cause. We don't really know and haven't defined what that common cause is. I say, I've got one line about the war, stopping the war. Someone said that if 1,000 people drafted, we used to be drafted, what if they called a war and nobody came? Is my line. What if they called a war and nobody came? We're providing, our military is now composed 35% of minorities who don't have another job. Who don't have another job and have to go in the Army which is being extolled, and the flag waving at the athletic concerts or athletic events. And it's all part of to get people to think that we've got to defend America, whether it costs us everything at home. I wish I knew how we could turn it around, but I feel that it's got to be turned with the youth, that it's got to be turned in the high schools and the colleges, because I think they've already bought us, and we didn't see it coming. But I think the youth see it coming, and it's affecting their jobs, and it's affecting their futures, affecting their families, and the way colleges are set up. We've got it, and it costs, when you go on the whole, an average of $65,000 to finish college here. And most of your colleges, particularly in China and around, are free college.
Thank you, Tom, for
Well,
such wonderful insight and sharing your thoughts with us.